This is a story about how a single battery brought an entire country's government services to a halt, and why the fate of whole nations, and quite possibly your own, depends on a small town in the Netherlands. In early October 2025, a fire broke out in the building in South Korea's main government data center.
We begin today with a fire that broke out.
This outage has caused chaos to, the entire country.
If it goes down, life in that region basically grinds to a halt.
First, technicians noticed smoke rising from a backup power module, and within seconds a lithium-ion cell triggered a chain reaction that turned the data center into a blazing furnace. The fire suppression system failed to start for less than a minute, and that was enough for the flames to jump onto the cables connecting the server racks in the hall.
By dawn, the fire had been extinguished, but by that time more than 600 of South Korea's government systems were down. Tax portals, postal networks, the mobile national ID app used by millions. Prime Minister Kim Min-seok later called it a paralysis of the country's digital backbone. About 858 terabytes of live data were left hanging between life and death. Backups existed, but they were scattered across different ministries. Some services were restored within a few days, others were silent for weeks, and some data were lost forever.
Officials say 62 out of 647 affected systems have been restored as of Monday afternoon.
You're probably still wondering what all this has to do with a little town in the Netherlands. Don't worry, you will find out soon enough, because you're on the Dr. Klaus channel, where we connect the unseen threads between data, power, and destiny. Buckle up and let's go.
Despite all the different versions circulating in Korean social media and press, the authorities confirmed this was not sabotage or a cyber attack. A simple failure of a single battery triggered the collapse of the entire digital infrastructure. Personally, it's hard for me to imagine the budget it takes to design and build a data center of that scale, but I know for certain that the value of the lesson the world learned is limitless. When digital governance becomes infrastructure, its resilience becomes a matter of national security. Within weeks of the incident, European and Japanese regulators were citing it as they reviewed backup power procedures in government data centers. In the United States, power companies began inspecting lithium installations feeding AI clusters. One accident crossed borders faster than any cyberworm. Just several weeks after regulators were still citing the Korean fire, another reminder arrived, this time from the heart of the global cloud. On October 20th, 2025, Amazon Web Services suffered one of the largest outages in its history.
On this Monday night, cloud chaos, the Amazon outage that broke a huge chunk of the internet.
The failure began in the US East region, Northern Virginia, at noon Pacific time, when a cascading malfunction crippled more than 30 major platforms at once. Zoom, Roblox, Fortnite, Snapchat, Duolingo, Canva, Venmo, Coinbase, even partial Google integrations and Viber connections across Europe and Asia. For 4 to 6 hours, large parts of the internet slowed to a crawl. Down Detector registered over 15,000 complaints, a digital earthquake rippling through finance, entertainment, and communication. AWS restored most systems by morning, yet local outages lingered for banks in the UK and payment networks worldwide. It wasn't sabotage, just another single-point failure, but it showed how fragile the modern cloud has become. Whether the grid burns or the cloud blinks, the effect is the same. Civilization pauses. Behind every smart city, every cloud, every neural network stands the power grid, physical, finite, vulnerable. And as demand for AI grows, that grid is stretched to its limit. Data center loads are doubling, transformers overheat, cooling lakes run low. Meanwhile, as servers in South Korea were still smoldering, another race thousands of kilometers away was accelerating, not for land or oil, but for lithography machines, GPU contracts, and the gigawatts of energy to feed them. And so we arrive in the Netherlands. In a sterile lab in Veldhoven, a beam of extreme ultraviolet light at 13.5 nanometers etches patterns onto silicon only a few atoms wide. This is EUV lithography. And only one company on Earth can build it, ASML. In 2025, ASML is the most strategically irreplaceable company on the planet. Its machines are passes to the future. Without them, you cannot print the transistors that become NVIDIA accelerators, Intel processors, or next-generation data center chips. Each EUV scanner is among the most complex creations ever made by human hands. Its price ranges from 150 to 350 million euros, and inside there are about 100,000 parts. To deliver a single machine, you need 40 shipping containers, 3 cargo planes, and 20 trucks. In 2023, the company shipped 53 EUV systems. Let me remind you of one more fact. The Netherlands is a NATO member and ally of the United States. The country is a member of the European Union. With a trump card like that, you might think it could pressure any economy or corporation, but that's not the case. Under US pressure, the Dutch government blocks deliveries of advanced EUV systems to China and allows only limited versions. Washington added its own unilateral restrictions starting in late 2023. Beijing calls it technological containment. Washington calls it national security. Chinese engineers are squeezing the maximum out of what they can buy, namely DUV machines, by applying multiple exposures. It's slower, harder, and more expensive, but it yields workable results at certain process nodes. EUV is a different league. There is no analog to this system, at least not yet. ASML's main strength lies not only in the machine, but in time. A startup with $1 billion can try to buy GPUs if it finds an open allocation. But to manufacture those chips, you need fabs that already own EUV and know how to run it at scale. That's why TSMC in Taiwan and Samsung in Korea have become geopolitical assets on the scale of aircraft carriers. ASML's leadership says plainly, China lags by roughly a decade at the leading edge, even despite progress at older process nodes. The gap isn't just about money, it's about time, supply chains, and those few thousand specialists on the planet who can keep these machines within spec. In 2025, ASML shipments are under close government scrutiny. For decades, lithography was a purely engineering field. Now it's a fault line of world politics. Whoever controls EUV shapes the future of AI.
Now that we have understood how the Netherlands fits into all this, let's figure out why Trump and NVIDIA are in the title and what phase of the Cold War around AI technologies the world is in right now. Let's imagine that, geopolitically, ASML is a factory producing the machine tools for making weapons. Then, the chips themselves are the weapons. NVIDIA today holds about 90% of the entire market for AI accelerators. By the end of 2025, contracts for such chips had come to resemble military agreements, signed in secret, priced in gigawatts, underpinned by export controls. Each class decides who gets to train for the next frontier AI model and who waits their turn.
The main shock came in October 2025. OpenAI signed a multi-year alliance with AMD to deploy 6 gigawatts of Instinct accelerators, starting with 1 gigawatt of MI450 in the second half of 2026. For AMD, this was recognition after long years in NVIDIA's shadow. For OpenAI, it was a matter of survival, a way to diversify compute in a world where the queue for NVIDIA chips had turned into a geopolitical choke. Around the same time, according to filings, Elon Musk's xAI was preparing to raise about $20 billion in capital tied to long-term NVIDIA supply.
The target is to raise $20 billion for the SPV.
In an era of scarcity, owning GPUs became the new definition of liquidity. Each line in an allocation meant leverage, each delivery slot a diplomatic argument. And for infrastructure, the stakes were even higher. A consortium of BlackRock, Microsoft, NVIDIA, xAI, MGX, and Temasek agreed to acquire aligned data centers for roughly $40 billion, locking in about 5 gigawatts of capacity, with the deal targeted to close in the first half of 2026. This wasn't a real estate deal, it was a power deal. They weren't buying buildings. They were buying headroom, megawatts in reserve for future AI clusters. Compute became a currency, and everyone wants reserves. Across Asia, supply chains shuddered as Chinese ports tightened inspections of NVIDIA's H20 and RTX 6000D chips, nearly paralyzing gray channels. Shipments slowed, procurement teams whispered about weeks-long queues at customs. Every parcel of silicon moved with the tension of a diplomatic pouch. In California, NVIDIA strove to keep the lead by scaling the Blackwell architecture and promising the next generation, Rubin, in 2026. In Austin, AMD began testing MI450 prototypes. And between them, every startup, fund, and government lab fought for delivery windows measured in months, not years. Each GPU shipment became an act of foreign policy. A single OpenAI contract for 6 gigawatts equals the load of several nuclear reactors. Oracle and other cloud giants are already planning tens of thousands of MI450s for their 2026 superclusters. This supply network now stretches across licenses, clearances, and grid quotas. Rumor has it that every contract comes with invisible footnotes, priority transport corridors, pre-cleared customs codes, and sometimes quiet state guarantees. In past centuries, nations stockpiled gold. Now they stockpile compute.
In 2025, the new arms race is fought not with missiles but with allocations and passions, because whoever controls the chips controls time. NVIDIA writes the present, AMD writes the alternative, and everyone else runs the future. Every revolution needs fuel. For AI, that fuel is electricity.
In 2025, data centers are no longer hidden on the edges of industrial zones. Now they're visible even from space, glowing rectangles on satellite heat maps, shining like digital volcanoes. And they are voracious. Each new generation of AI models consumes orders of magnitude more energy than the last. A single training run of a frontier-level model can burn as much electricity as a small city. Across America, utilities are sounding the alarm. In Virginia, once a quiet ring of suburbs, demand from hyperscale clusters has doubled since 2022. To keep up, the US Department of Energy issued a $1.6 billion federal loan guarantee to AEP to upgrade nearly 5,000 miles of transmission lines, an investment aimed at increasing overall grid capacity amid the explosive growth of data centers. Not for homes, not for factories, for servers. The International Energy Agency, IEA, forecasts that by 2026 global data center electricity consumption will almost match all of Japan's, and by 2030 it may exceed it. Europe is no better off. Ireland's Greater Dublin region operates under a de facto moratorium on new data center hookups until roughly 2028, and Amsterdam's 2019 ban was lifted only in 2020 under strict zoning and sustainability conditions. Policymakers chase decarbonization, but the physics of AI rewrites the balance. The fragility of power systems revealed itself in the summer of 2025, when Spain and Portugal experienced the largest blackout in the region's history. In the span of 5 seconds, the grid lost 15 gigawatts of capacity, and almost the entire Iberian Peninsula went dark. Airports switched to diesel, trains stopped, data centers overheated. It wasn't sabotage or a cyber attack, just a voltage surge and the incompatibility of old substations with new loads. Spain's Energy Minister Teresa Ribera emphasized, "It was a serious technical error, but not a cyber attack. It's a reminder that the grid must be reinforced for a more electric and more digital future." To secure stable supply, tech giants are becoming energy companies. Microsoft signed a 20-year power purchase agreement with Constellation Energy for about 835 megawatts, which enabled the restart of the nuclear reactor. In addition, Microsoft has a separate agreement for fusion-generated power with Helion. If someone had told me 20 years ago that Microsoft would be restarting nuclear reactors, I would have laughed. But electricity isn't the only resource data centers consume. In the Netherlands, in the small town of Hollands Kroon, Microsoft underestimated the thirst of its servers. On paper, the site was supposed to use no more than 20 million liters of water per year. In reality, during a hot summer, it consumed 84 million. That's like 30,000 residents left without water for the sake of the cloud. After the scandal, the company promised to switch to rainwater cooling and return excess moisture to local greenhouses. But the story reminded everyone, even digital technologies thirst for water. Amazon is investing heavily in wind and hydrogen energy. NVIDIA is putting money into storage companies to smooth training time load spikes. The new oil isn't a barrel, it's guaranteed uptime. But one question remains: who will pay for the grid that feeds all of this? In Ireland, residents protest mystery loads that drive bills higher. In the US, rural counties debate whether tax breaks for data center projects are worth the strain on infrastructure. Behind the slogan AI for Good lies a simple thermodynamic truth: information is never free. The more digital our civilization becomes, the more clearly its physical limits show. Cooling towers, transformers, water rights, these are now the foundations of artificial intelligence. Across Asia, nations are rushing to replicate this scale. Singapore is lifting its moratorium on data center construction while imposing new efficiency standards. India is rolling out tax incentives for liquid cooling farms. And South Korea, still recovering from the Daejeon fire, is auditing every backup system in government facilities.
Once electricity powered light bulbs, now it powers language models.
As grids bend under the load, the line between energy policy and national security fades. Because when you cannot train your model without a stable gigawatt of power, sovereignty starts to mean not authority, but capacity planning.
AI needs more than code, it needs current, and whoever controls the current controls the face of progress.
By late 2025, Washington's rhetoric about technology had hardened and increasingly resembled war planning. The new administration spoke not about cooperation, but about control. And at the center of that shift stood one man, President Donald Trump, back in the White House with a promise to rebuild American silicon.
His message was simple. If China wants to dominate AI, make it pay. If Europe wants access, make it contribute. If American companies want subsidies, make them stay at home.
In the fall of 2025, the administration bundled tariffs, export controls, and industrial incentives into a sweeping package of executive orders and regulatory measures aimed at bringing strategic supply chains back to the United States. An additional 100% tariff on imports from China was announced, effective November 1, 2025, on top of existing duties, with the list of covered goods to be clarified in follow-on rules. The market swayed, supply chains stuttered. The global trading system seemed to be reliving a remake of the 1980s, only now the battlefield was digital. NVIDIA, AMD, and Intel suddenly ceased to be just companies. They became instruments of state policy. Their allocation of chips could shift stock indexes or forge alliances. Meanwhile, allies from Japan and South Korea to the Netherlands felt pressure to mirror American restrictions on lithography and high-performance accelerators. This was not merely an economic decision. It was a doctrine, a blueprint for technological sovereignty. Precisely the kind of sovereignty NVIDIA's CEO Jensen Huang so often spoke about, not sovereignty over territory, but over compute. He openly called chips the new oil of the 21st century and warned that whoever controls compute resources controls the direction of civilization. The irony is that his own company became living proof of those words. In a world where borders run not along maps but along architectures and process nodes, NVIDIA became not just a technology supplier, it became an instrument of power. But tariffs cut both ways. For every export blocked, domestic prices rise. For every subsidized factory, there is a shortage of components somewhere else. The first to feel the shock were Europe's automotive and robotics sectors, which depend on Chinese components. And Beijing responded not with speeches or missiles, but with materials. China's authorities tightened export controls on strategic minerals and rare earth elements, small levers with outsized effects. Without stable supplies of gallium and germanium, chemical elements used primarily in electronics for their semiconductor properties, the production of advanced microchips slows and prices rise. Within weeks, Western companies were scrambling to secure backup sources in Australia and Africa, hedging against a prolonged squeeze. The United States and Australia have signed a $3 billion agreement to co-fund critical minerals projects over the next 6 months, part of an $8.5 billion agreement portfolio aimed at securing supplies of key resources for electronics and defense industries. Under the deal, the American Department of Defense will invest in a gallium processing plant in Western Australia, designed to produce 100 tons per year. The move follows China's export restrictions on rare earth elements essential for semiconductors, batteries, and electric motors. Gallium, for instance, is used in microwave circuits and blue-violet LEDs that power high-intensity lasers. In parallel, Australia will purchase $1.2 billion worth of autonomous underwater vehicles from US defense startup Anduril, possibly as part of the previously announced Ghost Shark program for the Royal Australian Navy. The deal underscores a broader US-Australia strategy to diversify supply chains, reduce dependence on China, and strengthen defense and energy resilience across the Indo-Pacific region. By the way, let's go back to 2019. That year, Donald Trump proposed that Denmark sell Greenland to the United States. Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen replied, "Greenland is not for sale."
Greenland is today are part of the Kingdom of Denmark. It's part of our territory.
Trump cancelled his visit to Copenhagen, and the world had a laugh. But the idea itself was not a joke. Beneath the island's ice lie some of the largest rare earth reserves in the world. According to the US Geological Survey, the Kvanefjeld area in southern Greenland contains significant resources of rare earth elements, uranium and zinc. The Geological Survey of Denmark and Greenland adds, the Illimausak complex hosts one of the world's largest deposits of rare earth elements and uranium, the Kvanefjeld project, considered critical for non-Chinese supply chains. These very metals, gallium, terbium, dysprosium, are becoming the nervous system of everything we call technology, from batteries and smartphones to radars and quantum chips. Greenland is not only minerals, but also a climatic asset. Cold, inexpensive hydropower and proximity to Atlantic cables make it an ideal zone for data centers and telecom infrastructure, where cooling costs almost nothing. This idea is already being discussed in official strategies, from the Greenland Connect initiative to plans for Arctic cloud hubs. The world saw eccentricity in it. Trump saw an investment in the future. In 2020, the United States opened its first consulate in Nuuk in half a century and allocated $12 million for infrastructure and mining projects. And in March 2025, already during his second term, Trump mentioned Greenland again in Congress. One way or another, we're going to get it. He later clarified in an interview with Reuters.
So we need Greenland for national security and even international security, and we're working with everybody involved to try and get it. But we need it really for international world security, and I think we're going to get it. One way or the other, we're going to get it.
Greenland remained independent, but the very idea that control over metals, energy and data center cooling could become a new equivalent of power has already spread far beyond the Arctic.
The irony is obvious. In trying to achieve technological independence and make others dependent, America created new dependencies for itself on rare earth miners, on grid capacity, on political stability abroad. The tariffs slowed part of China's chip progress, but accelerated Beijing's drive for self-reliance. By autumn, Huawei's Ascend 910C had already become the backbone of domestic superpod-class superclusters within a largely self-contained ecosystem, less global interoperability, more control.
Two systems, two supply chains, two realities, each trying to outphase other without ever meeting. Economists call it decoupling. Engineers put it more simply, inefficiency.
Duplicated fabs, repeated research, parallel logistics. But for Washington, this trade-off is acceptable, because control, even inefficient control, is still control. Tariffs may hurt, but they buy time to rebuild fabrication, strengthen alliances, and draw new digital borders before the next crisis hits.
For the first time since the nuclear age, policy and physics have fused. A new deterrent is compute power.
Across China in 2025, a second technological universe is taking shape. Familiar in outline, different in detail. Where the Western stack rests on lithography, the Chinese stack is learning to live without all of that, or with diluted, delayed versions. It all begins at the bottom, with lithography. After restrictions on ASML's most advanced tools, fabs are betting on immersion DUV with multi-patterning, slower and more expensive than EUV, but workable at certain process nodes. At first, yields were inconsistent, then stabilized. Not state-of-the-art, but good enough for certain classes of AI. If you can't buy the future, you approximate it. Higher up the chain come the accelerators. China's answer is the Ascend series of chips for training and inference within a self-contained ecosystem. Rather than copying CUDA, the Chinese stack goes its own way. CAN for kernels and compilation, MindSpore as the framework, and a toolkit of vendor optimizations. Huawei promotes superpod class and larger clusters for domestic workloads, capacities stated by the vendor rather than independent tests.
Two internets once coexisted, now two AI economies do.
Licensing regimes for large models fix red lines, safety reviews merge with content control, procurement favors national tooling. AI becomes not a commodity, but a public utility, interoperable with the state, aligned with policy, insulated from external shocks. For Western companies, this is a new map of the world. The largest market runs on a different stack, speaks a different API, and obeys a different clock. It will not collapse. nor will it converge quickly. It will coexist, sometimes competing, sometimes ignoring, and always complicating the economics of a single global AI supply chain.
Now let's talk about regulation and start with the European Union.
The EU Artificial Intelligence Act entered into force on August 1st, 2024. From that moment, Europe set a metronome of 4 beats for the world, rewriting how AI is built, deployed, and governed. Beat 1, February 2nd, 2025. Unacceptable risk practices became illegal. Social scoring, biometric categorization, covert manipulation, emotion recognition at work and in education. AI literacy measures went into effect, not guidance but binding norms. Beat 2, August 2nd, 2025. Providers of general-purpose AI models, GPAI, received new obligations. Transparency on training data summaries, copyright safeguards, documentation, and cooperation with national authorities and the new AI Office. For the first time, the EU drew a regulatory circle not around the application but around the model itself. As of August 2nd, 2025, these rules apply to new models. Legacy GPAI must comply by August 2nd, 2027. In Europe, a model is not a black box. It is a regulated product. Beat 3, August 2nd, 2026. Core obligations for high-risk systems take effect. Risk management, data quality, human oversight, post-market monitoring, and incident reporting. Compliance must be proven before deployment, not after a scandal. Beat 4, August 2nd, 2027. Rules extend to high-risk AI embedded in regulated products, from medical devices to autonomous driving, granting an extended runway into 2027 to align with sectoral conformity assessments. No market freeze, but much tighter gates.
Europe is not trying to win a sprint, it's trying to finish a marathon without breaking its knees.
From the outside, this can look slow or conservative, even like resistance to technological progress, but often there is a deeper logic. GDPR is one such example, an old law that has for years served as an effective tool for protecting Europeans' data. The price of AI regulation is quite real. Compliance teams grow, documentation thickens, rollout speeds fall. Many complain about friction, and yet the incentives work. Certify once in the EU, and you gain trust everywhere. If not, you risk becoming a regional orphan, cut off from 500 million affluent consumers. Non-compliance is expensive, up to 35 million euros or 7% of global turnover for prohibited practices, and up to 15 million euros or 3% for other violations. The effect extends beyond Brussels. Allies and rivals must decide whether to mirror these standards, ignore them, or fork their products. For cloud providers, the Act collides with data sovereignty rules: where to host models, how to route traffic, which logs must remain on European soil. For chip and tool vendors, it turns traceability from a nice-to-have into a license to sell. The EU, as a powerful economic political bloc, in effect builds rules around which the rest of the world orbits. In the new AI Cold War, rules are infrastructure. They determine where capital flows, how fast models ship, and who can claim to be safe by design. Europe has chosen the slow, audited path, staking on durable trust over instant speed. Whether that bet pays off depends on one thing: the rest of the world's willingness to meet Europe halfway.
Our empire eventually learns a simple truth: power is not what you can build, power what you can keep running.
In 2025, the map of global power looks very different from the one after World War II. Its borders are invisible, drawn by data routes, lithography tools, GPU allocations, and megawatts. Arsenals are data centers, soldiers are engineers, and victories arrive not with flags, but with firmware updates. The fire in Korea became not just an accident, but a symbol, one overheated battery revealing how deeply states depend on energy, infrastructure, and timing. When one module fails, hundreds of systems stop. When one country blocks a component, entire supply chains freeze. The new Cold War needs no missiles. It has dependencies. This is not a war of ideologies. It is a war of voltage. In this war, NVIDIA is the superpower, ASML the king, AMD the balance, Trump's tariffs the walls, China's mirror stack the alternative world, and the European AI Act the constitution for those who still believe rules can tame ambition. The United States draws its lines through export control, keeping the frontier at arm's length. China draws its lines inward, rebuilding that frontier from scratch. Europe writes its lines into law, betting on trust and audit over speed. Everyone calls it sovereignty. Everyone defines it differently. Beneath the loud headlines of conflict lies not politics, but physics. AI consumes energy faster than the grids grow. Training a model is not a metaphor, it is a thermodynamic transaction. Every parameter has a carbon shadow. Every API call is real current from a generator somewhere in the world. Energy has become the limit of civilization. The dream of a single global AI ecosystem has split into three worlds: the American commercial empire, fueled by venture capital and GPUs, the Chinese technocratic sphere, built on planning and parallelism, and the European orbit of rules, held together by legal gravity. None of them can exist without the others, and none can fully trust the others.
Called balance, that is the most the world can hope for. Called balance is not peace, it's equilibrium under tension, the recognition that mutual disruption costs more than restraint. Thus, the new AI Cold War mirrors the nuclear age, deterrence through dependency, stability through scarcity.
And at the center of it all lies the grid, humming, finite, fragile, the main battlefield of the digital century.
Now that you have seen part of the bigger picture, allow me to share a bit about myself and why this topic interests me at all.
I was born and raised in Ukraine. With the start of the full-scale war, I became fascinated by geopolitics, not as a stream of news, but as a study of causes and consequences that change the course of modern history. I've always been interested not in what happened, but why it happened, and what it means for the future. By profession, I am a lawyer. For more than 14 years, I have worked in technology and international corporate law, involved in managing major projects with Icon.Partners law firm at the intersection of business, politics, and technology. I try to look at the world objectively as much as possible, but in the end, we are all human, and each of us has a personal opinion. I would be glad to hear yours. Share in the comments what you think about this topic and how you see what is happening.
You were on the Dr. Claus channel, a place where we analyze not the news but the reasons from which the news is born. Here we talk about the technologies, politics and laws that shape tomorrow.